recording our conversation today about Jim Goad and his assessment of Los Angeles, I realized it completely slipped my mind to make the obvious comparison to another Los Angeles transplant who was also, in fact, a terrific conservative artist. Jim Goad and David Lynch actually had very similar conceptions of Los Angeles. They both saw it as a city with a kind of split reality between dreams and fantasies, and dreams broken and undone, manifested as nightmares. But that similarity in their assessment also belied the fundamental difference between the spiritual optimist and the cosmic pessimist. For Goad, the pessimist, the dream of Los Angeles is only a lie that serves to distort and cover up the reality of the nightmare that lurks beneath. For David, however, the optimist, the nightmare exists so the beauty of the light, of the dream, of the fantasy, of that possibility can pronounce itself more brightly. For David, evil was necessary because only through evil can we actually distinguish what makes good, what makes beauty, what makes truth. Goad was never able to see the world this way. For him, evil existed because that was the nature of the world itself. All good was merely just a masquerade. And the reality of those interpretations manifested in their lives. David Lynch had an amazing life. He had many women who loved him. He achieved every single one of his dreams and died as a very old and content man. Goad, on the other hand, had a deeply troubled life, a laundry list of past women who he'd abused and who abused him, and whose dreams all had been undone or taken from him, or simply had not been fulfilled in the first place. And he took his own life well before his actual expiration date. It certainly makes you think. I believe that, Jim Goad, who I truly believe was a great talent, a great writer, and a massive influence in my life, I believe he's also a cautionary tale for a bleak existence and a bleak outlook. Ultimately, you can make great art and also delight in the beauty of the world. And that is what I wish he was able to do.
You are listening to Filthy Armenian Adventures. This is your host, Alec Mohibian. That was my guest, Adam Lehrer, and we are gathered here to commemorate a great but very troubled man who said to Sunset Boulevard, "Answer me!" and lived to report the answer. Hey, this is your host, Alec Mohibian, with a quick message before we continue. Based in that great but very troubled place, Hollywood, California, Filthy Armenian Adventures is an interdimensional travel program that takes you deep into the cultural mysteries of our time. In search of truth, in search of gold, in search of lost friends and unsung heroes, in search of John Galt's motor. This show is your antidote to the black pill. This is your guide to the places, the personalities, the ideas and creations the enemies of man don't want you to know. This is your techno-noir investigation into the good, the evil, and the God hiding under our noise. This is where you get the news before it breaks, before it blows, before it burns. The show is supported entirely by patrons at patreon.com/filthyarmenian. As a patron, you get access to twice as many adventures, including the most important ones, the ones with the real facts. Plus, regular brief smoke break spiritual reports on topics of the day. As a patron, you also get exclusive access to our Smash live events. Ask anyone who's attended one, and they will tell you it's an experience you'll never forget. It's very easy to keep Filthy Armenian Adventures alive. You can still listen to the show on your favorite app like Spotify or Apple, and you can do so with the pride that you're putting a little bit of money where your soul is. More patrons means more fuel, more topics, more investigations, more miracles, more secret locations, and forbidden territories around the world, and the world that is Los Angeles, our post-apocalyptic headquarters. It means we'll be able to track down more enchanting figures in the landscape, dare them to abandon their masks, and join our quest out of the darkness and into a golden age. Patreon.com/filthyarmenian. Thank you for being one of the good ones, and enjoy the show. Nobody more, I would say, different than Steve Jobs than the person that I've called you here to talk about today. It's hard to imagine.
Well,
he is
a renegade in a
very different manner. Maybe they are joined at the hip, but in terms of their role in the world, Jim Goad is about as far away, is about as far on the opposite side of Sunset Boulevard as you get from Steve Jobs. And I know a lot of people listening are very well aware of who Jim Goad was, but for those who aren't, and I'm kind of in the middle because I became aware of him by being online and, by knowing all you guys. I did not have any awareness of him before my Filthy Armenian career. For some reason, it never came across him. Not for some reason, it's for obvious why. He'd already become persona non grata by the time, by the time I emerged as a human being in the 2000s. He was already kind of canceled forever. So it was already something you had to find deep down. Even though his work as a magazine editor is very similar to what I was doing in college in terms of spirit and, provocation and the whole energy of it. So I would have loved to have found Answer Me back then, but I never did. I'd taken a few looks here and there at some friends' houses in the last few years who have the beautiful bound collection of the magazine, of all the issues. And I read bits and pieces here of an interview with Al Sharpton, or the bacterial point of view of how AIDS works. That one was like I read a few paragraphs of that. I'm like, this is too close to home, man. I just can't. I just came back from the LGBT center. I can't be living within my own bacterial entities right now. But introduce, if you can, for someone who has no idea who Jim Goad was. Who Jim Goad was.
Okay, so the most basic way to describe him is he's an important writer / gonzo journalist from the 90s. But more in depth is Jim. There was a very important transgressive literary scene in the 90s, Gen X to the max, revolving around several projects, magazines, and publishers. I would say kind of the chief among them was Adam Parfrey, who Adam Parfrey's work as an editor was my access point to like all this stuff. He was the one that I discovered first through his anthology book, Apocalypse Culture. And what was Apocalypse Culture was basically like a collection of writers with very extreme viewpoints, not always right wing, not necessarily left wing, but like a collage of extreme thinkers, if you will. And this extended to his publishing company, Feral House. You know, he's the guy who put out like James Mason's Siege, um, which is like a work of Holocaust denial. But other writers involved with this, Peter Sotos, everybody knows his legacy, writing about pedophilia and such and such. Um, and then even like even some like interesting people that you wouldn't expect to be in these books um, would occasionally turn up. Michael Moynihan, for instance, a far right writer who was also a pretty big neo folk musician. Boyd Rice, industrial musician slash journalist in a similar vein, also right wing. So I'm learning about all this stuff. And one article in Apocalypse Culture is written by Jim Goad. That was the first thing I ever read by him. And then because of that, I discovered Jim Goad's probably like what we consider to be his masterwork now, which is his 4-volume magazine, Answer Me! Exclamation point. And I don't think it's like that hard for people to see like how he influenced me, because like there's so much of what I do is like clearly referential of him, like my work is kind of, like I've always been uncomfortable with the term journalism because I'm not like, a muckraker trying to just like find shit out all the time. I'm trying to like use observation to find a truth that makes sense to me, which is entirely Jim Goad's philosophy. Answer Me is essentially works of journalism and essaying that are clearly written from a very personal subjectivity. Um, and the other thing that I think made Jim different than the other Gen X guys that he came up along with is their work was always very irony drenched, kind of utilizing the cultural mores of the 90s, the anything goes, like no censorship liberalism of the 90s. Clinton's in office, everything's good, wah, wah, wah. But Jim Goad is very much an ideologue. Um, and it was just kind of important for me to see that there was a guy who sort of had political feelings similar to us, but still very much understood the legacy of the avant-garde, transgressive aesthetics, and he's not a fucking prude. That's kind of the main thing, is it's like it's not a moral browbeating right wing. It's mean, it's occasionally very mean-spirited, but it's also very illuminating. There's a lot of truth in it. And he had just like such an unbelievable observational wit. I had only spoken with Jim like twice on Instagram messages, and he was not a very easy person to get along with. Every time he ever reached out to me was to complain about something I said or did. Like, for instance, when I wrote that piece about after Steve Albini died, and I wrote about like, how he just spent the last 10 years of his life becoming like a shitlib apologist for the first 45 years of his life and how pathetic it was. I assumed Jim would reach out to say, good job, fuck that asshole. But in fact, he reached out to me to complain that he believed ascribing traits to entire generations was quote unquote low IQ, which I completely disagreed with. I think it's absurd to assume that people who grew up with a similar set of cultural, technological, social, and political norms wouldn't have some sort of observable characteristics as a group. But, that was him. He was very cantankerous. And unfortunately, towards the last 10 years of his life, especially when he tried to become like a more standard political commentator, he acted in ways that I thought and a lot of other people thought were very unbecoming of an artist of his stature, getting in petty back and forths with low level alt right journalists and stuff. Um, and then, of course, he did just die. He died in June. I had known about this since like the day after he died because I have two sources that were very close to him, and they were really upset that his family, for whatever reason, was trying to hide his death from the public at first. Um, but I didn't want to go ahead and publish it right away because I felt they must have their reasons, and I'm sure their reasons were like they feared what people who hated Goad would say about him on the internet. So I waited until the death was announced. But what really forced me to write that article for Safety Propaganda, which turned out to be like the most popular thing I've ever published on the blog, um, was the fact that they announced his death and attributed it to natural causes. That was a complete lie. I don't know their reasons for lying about it, but Jim killed himself. That's 100% verifiable truth. I had two sources, and I got corroboration from his autopsy report. Like, Jim killed himself. And I felt that what they were trying to do was like, it looks bad for like a right winger to kill themselves or whatever, for Christian conservative reasons or, shitty notions about suicide as weakness. But I've never believed that to be true. I've always found it like very dismissive of people's pain. Like anyone who's gone through clinical depression should know that like suicide is not that cowardly a stance. Some people just really can't hack it anymore. And maybe it is a form of weakness or resignation, but it's so common that I don't think it should be treated with contempt. And I had no interest in treating Jim's death with like that kind of contempt. Furthermore, Jim wrote about suicide in Answer Me. And he actually said people that actually commit suicide are often higher intelligence because they see the bleak reality of the world. And he actually said that the people who don't even entertain the thought of suicide are the people who make life unbearable for the rest of us. So to me, it just kind of followed this logical progression and path of his life. And, his death is a real tragedy, of course, but at the same time, I was so unsurprised that it happened. He was not a happy person, and he had become increasingly bitter in later in his life. But like the legacy of his work, I really, really, really want to be a part of making sure that it gets the renown that it deserves now. And I'm glad to see that we're doing this, and I'm glad to see that a lot of people are discovering that stuff for the first time.
Yeah, there's a lot to unpack here, as they say. He committed suicide. He had did he not have an entire issue dedicated to suicide, or was it just an article? One of the Answer Me's.
It was an article. It was called the 50 greatest or the 100 greatest suicides of all time. And he found a bunch of anecdotes of both like, celebrities like the photographer Dion Arbus, and then like random people that he read about in the news that he just found to be like, there was this one suicide of this woman who kept like swallowing shrapnel or fucking like jewels and shit until she died. Yeah. So an irreverent treatise on suicides throughout history.
And maybe second only to his entire rape issue in terms of the controversiality of subject matter. We can talk about his rape issue because I think that there's sort of a, we've skated over the fact that he was kind of primed for major mainstream success, and then legal troubles originating from either insanity or dealing with too many insane people completely derailed him and put him even in jail. But first, I just want to say, regarding the matter of suicide, now, there's word that he was terminally ill. Is that true or false? Because that changes the...
Not terminally, or he was very ill for a long period of time. I don't know. How terminal it was. I don't know if I don't know like what the end game was, but he did have some really severe health problems.
The thing with suicide is it's not something to obviously be cavalier about or to scoff at or to like giggle about, or it's understandable why people are so pedantically opposed to it and dismissive of it, and wanting to kind of sweep it under the rug. It's understandable because, as you can see from his own life, when you dabble too much with anything satanic, with anything hellish, it's like the Chekhov's gun situation. You write an article about the 100 greatest suicides. You are really setting yourself up just as a psychological trick. I mean, it's like any magician would tell you. If you're hanging that pistol on your wall, in your bathroom, and the day will come when your thoughts turn dark and you've already primed yourself to take this sort of thing very seriously, and that is problematic to me. I mean, I don't, the thing is that it gets, life will, like, he's right that I have zero, I mean, as we can see by this Jason Arday guy, of course, one of the most brilliant scholars who ever lived, who just committed suicide. Clearly, it's a very high IQ endeavor, and
Jason Arday, isn't he?
Yeah, the plagiarist guy, the black plagiarist with the crazy guys who just killed themselves. I mean, if he can kill himself, it's obvious that this is only something that's available to those of us elites of the mind, who see the world for all.
Yeah, I guess he's a bad example of the elitism of suicide.
But I get, I understand Goad's point. It's like suicide.
Well, just like, I'm a little more sympathetic about the notion. I had this really close friend in high school and beyond, James Martin. He had a horrific brain disorder. I forget what it was called, but essentially his pituitary gland overproduced hormones like testosterone and growth hormone, but not in a cool way, in a way that literally was causing all his internal organs to grow, his skull to grow, his brain to grow. And he was just like in absolutely crippling pain.
Yeah, you see, that's different to me, even though it's the same. Everything is like, pain is pain in a way. Like, mental torture is not necessarily any easier to deal with than physical torture, but it is actually never.
There's that great line in The Sopranos, right? Like, after AJ tries to kill himself in The Sopranos, Tony is kind of writing it off like he was weak, he was a baby little child, and then Melfi says, I can see a lot of people saying that, but not you, who's dealt with clinical depression. And Tony just kind of resigns himself because he knows she's right. Like, to assume, like, we all have these oceans of subjectivity in our brain. To assume that it's like impossible that somebody could be tortured by their own subjectivity is like so fucking arrogant.
No, of course it's possible, but I do basically I side with the moralists on this one, or whatever you want to call them, only because they're correct in the fact that as we can see with the entire library, the library of Alexandria of mental illness that has been erected over the last 10, 15, 30, however many years you want to credit, 50, 60, going back to the 50s, really to the popularity of psychoanalysis and everything, but especially in the last 15 years, 20 years, where it's like there's literal human beings supposedly emergent of the womb who have their profiles, who identify by their mental illnesses, like the liptard, like the blue-haired, blue sky liptard, where it seems like a comical creation by Ayn Rand, but it isn't, where they literally identify by their several mental illnesses, and all of them really got excited by being by catching the long COVID and like that mental thing. It's clear that anytime you kind of permit us, it's another Chekhov's gun. It's like you permit something to be taken as this super serious condition. You're going to have people who who sign up for it, and who, instead of just kind of battling away their dark periods in life, convince themselves that it's like they have a condition. And depression is one of them. I mean, depression is obviously real. It's been around from the beginning. I've had it. I always have. I have it right now. No, I mean, I've had it pretty bad. Okay, and for not a short amount of time, and I have felt suicidal for brief periods of time. Brief, like I've identified the times that I felt suicidal, and it literally happened like 2 or 3 times in my life, and it was within being depressed, and it is something that makes me pretty sure that Accutane is responsible, by the way, because I was on Accutane in freshman year of college.
Is that a SSRI?
No, that's the thing that gets rid of your acne forever.
Oh, okay, yeah, I heard about.
Yeah,
this,
it's
actually.
well known. I mean, it's
Depression
well
and
known
subjects.
that it causes depression, but it's also not like firmly hard scientific fact. You know, they're like, the dermatologist was saying, oh, it's mostly anecdotal, blah, blah, blah. He was really trying to brush it under the rug. Oh, yeah, you know, we all have blue days. But I do think, and I was already depressed by being in college, because I went from high school, which was to me like I was king of the world, and in my own way. And I went to college where I was a nobody, and I had already been disillusioned the summer before college by reasons I won't even get into. And I was in a tough place.
Yeah.
I was in a tough place already. My grandmother was dying and died very suddenly. And I was depressed anyway, but there were 2 periods of about 3 hours each, like an afternoon each, within that time, that I felt so like artificially hopeless and despairing that I knew in my own mind that I'm feeling suicidal. This is going to pass, because this is like ridiculous. Like, this is truly this, like, so, but I felt it. It was like a simulation it wasn't a simulation. It was the actual feeling of being like, oh yeah, this is why people kill themselves, because they find themselves in this situation. They don't have the ability to disassociate from it, as that I have developed by being an intellectualoid or whatever, by being over introspective. You know, it helped me understand that this doesn't seem right. This seems like something that's going to pass, and it did pass. And eventually, I worked myself out of the whole big D, and everything is fine. But I did feel it. I did feel it twice, and something could have happened, because all it would have taken. I wasn't going to go through the process of committing suicide, because that's retarded as a young man, especially, but who's otherwise healthy. But it was a type of thing where, you know, if I'm standing on the edge of the cliff and something happens, and, you know, something seduces you or whatever, and I would have been like, what would happen if I just jumped off or whatever? You know, it could have happened. It was conceivable for the only time in my life, and I've only felt that 2 or 3 times ever. So I do get the impulse to commit suicide. I also, if it's a matter of physical torture, that to me is a different subject entirely, because that's just, yeah. I don't know how that to me is a matter of endurance. Like, how would and unfortunately, yeah. I think about it too often as the years advance. I'm like, well, what happens if I get old and I'm in a situation where, like, it's just painful to breathe? You know, like that to me is a different, that sort of end of life, like off-ramp situation that feels like a different argument entirely. But when it comes to this sort of decision people make due to mental agony, it's unfortunately true that if you put suicide on the table as a respectable option, let's say, or as an as an acceptable option, people are like, there was some chicken. This is something that fucking Richard fucking Hanania posted about. There was some like 26-year-old or something who took the assisted suicide route in Europe. Like some 26-year-old girl.
Yeah, no, I reported about it. She claimed that she was at like, this whole story is fucked and like really hard to make heads or tails of because there's like a little bit in there for everybody from every side of the political aisle. She claimed that she had been kicked out of her home by her parents and that she was raped by because in Spain they have this bizarre policy where like Spanish street kids are placed in the same group homes as um, unaccompanied minor migrants. And this girl claims that she had been gang raped by migrants, like migrant youths. Um, which is the part of the story that like you kind of have to dig a little bit for, but that's kind of like the most unnerving aspect of it. And then yeah, the state granted her state assisted suicide, which is crazy because it's basically like Spain admitting that they created such a hell for this girl that they want. I don't
Yeah,
know.
I'm
But yeah, I
so
read about the story and I don't know what, like I couldn't tell what part was
I'm
true or
not about
not.
to start believing women, even if they're committing a state assisted suicide at the age of 26. I mean, I get like
It doesn't
it
scream
doesn't scream
credibility.
credibility,
Yeah.
and it does scream insanity.
Oh,
It screams like being highly suggestible. I'm sure she thought she got raped. I mean, we've seen this. How many times have we seen this happen? I mean, I'm sure she convinced herself. It just sounds like craziness. And the fact is that when you have state assisted craziness, you're going to get people taking that option. And, maybe it's not the greatest loss to society. Who cares? You could say if you're heartless about things or practical or whatever. But the fact is that if that avenue is open to you, people are going to take it. And granting state-assisted suicide to a physically healthy 26-year-old girl is, I just think like that just shows you that something has gone. Like we should not be doing that as a society. This is not the Dr. Kevorkian
bro,
thing.
perfect segue. Um, Perfect segue. But did you hear about the Me Too scandal about the black painter, contemporary artist Kehinde Wiley?
No. Wiley Coyote.
Okay, so
They call him
Kehinde,
Wiley Coyote.
yeah, yeah, no, there's a lot of funny shit about Kehinde Wiley. Like all his paintings are actually painted by a white woman who works for him, but whatever, that's neither here nor there. It's just a funny anecdote that I know. Anyways, Kehinde Wiley, to show like how central this guy is to the upper echelon libtardism of the art world, he did the Michelle Obama portrait and the Obama portrait after they left the White House. Like that's how big
Oh
he
boy.
is. Um, in 2024, this dude Joseph Awua Darko, who is from he's British Ghanaian, so I guess he's just British. He claimed that Kehinde Wiley had both raped and stalked him for years. And crazily, the New York Times published an article about this without any corroboration. Of course, Kehinde Wiley had shows canceled all over the place. The Minneapolis Institute of Art, the Perez in Miami. These are big blockbuster exhibitions that they're just getting rid of over flimsy accusations. And then this guy, Joseph, after accusing another big art world bigwig, curator named Derek Ingram, of similar accusations, he then did a social media campaign where he claimed he was going to the Netherlands for state-assisted suicide because he could no longer live with what had happened to him. And he was having people pay him to have their final dinners with him and conversations with him before he goes. And if this would only work in the art world, but he made a lot of money. And he was like traveling all the world having these final dinners. A couple of years go by, and this dude is still fucking alive. So people start taking to Reddit being like, hey, did anyone else have like a dinner with Joseph Darko and like expect him to be dead by now? And And yeah, so a lot of people started talking about how this guy is a grifter. Um, like it's all over the internet and Instagram now. Even like liberals are like, this guy is an absolute psychopath, but he's very good at segmenting his social media. So as soon as someone pushes back, they're blocked. So if you go on his profile, it's all people just being like, keep your head up, blah, blah, blah. But yeah, like that's how far mental illness culture has gone, that this guy ruined a celebrated artist's life. Still, the New York Times has not published a retraction or a counterpiece or anything. It's just there. And this guy grifted hundreds of thousands of
And people are
dollars
just okay. Like,
off
are
of
people just okay with this? Because I think that they're just so. I mean, this is just like the libtard kind of takeover of everything has zapped anyone's ability to.
yeah. Well, because this guy should be like, he should be liable.
He should
for
be in
fraud,
jail.
because some of the
He
stuff,
should not be allowed.
like this is even worse. He used his credibility from the accusations as like a woke hero or whatever to start a residency program called the Noldor Residency, where he said he was trying to uplift young African artists. He sold a bunch of artists' work, netted $266,527.03 from these sales. And now the artists are suing him because they didn't get a fucking penny. This guy's just like a regular con man who's full. You got to give him some credit. He's very, very, very in tune with the cultural mores of the day to be able to pull these long-term frauds. But the fact that this can be happening in plain sight, and this guy's just getting away with it, it's fucking shocking.
I'm just like, I always hear about some news story about one of these characters, and then I see a picture of them. And this goes all the way back to like Ted Bundy too and stuff. But like after all this, like there's all this hullabaloo about someone, like how he tricked everyone into giving him millions, and he wined and dined with the world's kings and queens. And then you look at him, a picture of him, and he looks like a fucking insane freak escaped from an asylum. Like this Arde guy, Like you look at literally any picture of him in existence, and he looks like an insane clown freak who's obvious.
He looks like
he's
an
obvious scammer who's dead inside. Like he's a sociopath. Yeah. And it's just like, how is everyone so fucking stupid in this world? And even being libtards, like it's not even about political.
Well, he got caught.
Well, he got caught, and that's why he had
I'm not happy that the man killed himself.
But that's what con men frequently do when they get caught. They do kill themselves.
The psychology of the plagiarist is fascinating, because like, especially when I first started writing stuff for newspapers and magazines, if I felt I got a single quote wrong, like it just didn't, or like I was just unsure, I would be racked with anxiety and panic, like that I was gonna get a call from my editor saying and it's just the normal feeling when you're first getting to work. These people that, like the guy who who unfortunately shares my last name, Jonah Lehrer, who wrote the fraudulent Bob Dylan book, or Stephen Glass from the New Republic, who was, or what?
No, he was the New Republic. And by the way, he makes millions of dollars now in the legal profession. I know someone who works with him.
Well, he's a smart motherfucker, and he's a sociopath, so legal is probably good for him. But like, to be able to live in that kind of anxiety, especially with Jonah Lehrer, like you didn't think he was just hoping that Bob Dylan was so unconcerned with media that he wouldn't say anything. Like, think of the fucking psychosis that makes you gamble on that you write a whole book of fraudulent, fake Bob Dylan quotes.
Yeah.
And you're just praying that Bob doesn't actually say anything about it.
To me, that's almost, that's like, it's inconceivable to me because I am so tortured by, first of all, I've always been tortured by, to a fault, by the burden of originality. I've always, like since the earliest days, I got plagiarized in literally the 6th grade. I've told the story on my Paul Revere.
Wow.
I had my science project in the 6th grade was about a presentation and whatever about the football, the radio in the football in the quarterback's helmet in the NFL. You know, very specific thing. 2 days later,
Yeah.
2 days later, this Persian kid Babek comes in with his presentation. Guess what it's about? It's about the same exact thing. And then and that's when my teacher took me aside, because I was like, what the fuck? And my teacher took me aside after class, and he said, you know, you heard of this word called plagiarism? That's where I learned what I literally learned about plagiarism because someone played.
Was he accusing you, or did he know that you had been plagiarized?
He was, you know, he was trying to like calm me down, and he wasn't going to make a big, he wasn't in the mood to make a big stink about it, because it's the 6th grade. This isn't fucking, you know, this isn't a grad school. He wasn't in the mood to get into a thing over it, but he was just sympathizing with me and explaining to me what happened. And it was like so obvious but I didn't know what the word plagiarism was. And he taught me in relation to how I had just been ripped off by Babek. But I've always been haunted by the feeling. To the degree that I don't even like remembering. I don't like quoting a lot, and I don't like even remembering my own like zingers, because I always want to be coming up with something fresh and new, and like not just being a recycling machine. And I've always been, and it's just a shame of like the whole, to me, the whole point of writing or expressing yourself in any way is to be original. And I realize that some people are more curatorial, or some people are more, some styles are more aggregational, whatever you want to call it. It's not.
Yeah, I would say I have a little.
Yeah,
bit
no,
of
it's
both,
there are plenty of there
like
are many ways to
references,
skin the cat on and to be useful and interesting. It's not. I'm just saying, like, I say to a fault, because it should be. It can really slow me up at times and like entangle me. I'm like, if
I have.
No, I mean,
Sorry,
I'm just
go
saying,
ahead.
like, the idea of like eagerly doing it and of willfully doing it and doing it at scale is completely beyond my ability to comprehend. Like, you have to be just you just have to be a different kind of creature entirely to be able to do that. And a creature who can do that, the kind of sociopathic quality that it requires is just like puts you on a different level. And
It's alien.
yeah, it is alien, and it freaks me out. It just freaks me out. I understand if there's a deadline and you haven't slept for 3 days and you need to like file a piece and you just can't and you're just out of wit. You're at your wit's end and you just need to finish the job, and you just do whatever, send it in and go to sleep. I understand that kind of plagiarism in the world of constant deadlines and high pressure, and like you just need to get this shit out, and your brain isn't really even functioning. I understand that. Mistakes happen too. There's often the case where you'll think you came up with something, but you actually read it somewhere else. And that happens all the time, and that's just human frailty. I mean, that's just, I'm sure I've done that too, because like there's no way not to.
I got one more great anecdote about grifters in the media. This happened to me today, and then we should segue back to
and I
Jim.
know the segue too.
But I've been Tablet's been throwing some pretty hard assignments on me. Not like literarily hard, but like just high profile people that are hard to get to agree to interviews. Of these, though, the one that I thought would be kind of simple is: are you familiar with the fashion brand Enfant Riche de Prime, Depressed Rich Kids?
No. That's what it's called. That's what it means.
It's a very interesting.
Enfant Riche de Prime means
depressed rich kids. Yeah, and it was very much like a clever joke, because at first they would just make like a punk rock graphic T-shirt and sell it for $5,000 out of a small boutique in LA. But since in the last 5 years has risen to being a very real, very high quality fashion house with a pair of Parisian runways. And even more interesting to me is that the designer Henri de Levy is Jewish, and he uses lots of references to both Nazism, but also to Kabbalah mysticism and Zionism. And it's interesting to me how the terms have changed because he's always accused of being a fascist sympathizer, despite the fact that he's very much commenting on his Jewish background. So that's just like catnip for like a tablet angle, right?
Yeah.
Um, and I have a lot of I have a lot of mutuals with Henry, so I thought it would be kind of easy, but no one at the brand has been getting back to me. I've gone through Elena, through Salome, through my friend Alex Cassavin, who used to do some styling for them, and nothing. Today, I find out why. I get reached out to by this black guy named Jean Pierre, and he unprompted asked, which is kind of strange, but maybe I just put it out there online, that he's the co-founder of ERD, and he was fucked out of the brand by Henry. That's his claim, which is interesting. So maybe that's an angle for a story if there is one. So I say, hey, yeah, cool. I'd love to talk to you. But then he starts saying things that immediately set my alarm bells off. He goes from making a claim that is substantive. My work was stolen and I was not given credit, which is a legally actionable claim. I think he might actually be litigating it, and that would explain why, ERD is not doing any press right now. But as soon as he made that claim, he then started segueing to look at all the racist references inside this brand. And then he sends me a shoe, looks like a moccasin, and it's called Racist Uncle's Slipper, right?
Yeah.
Funny title. And he goes, this is clear evidence of racism. And all I say is, how? It's a joke about the type of shoes your crazy racist uncle would wear. And then he starts going crazy. And it becomes very clear to me he is not looking for a journalist or writer to interrogate his claims and find the truth. He's looking for mouthpiece. And it completely reminded me of the Kehinde Wiley guy, because he starts... I started writing. What was great about this guy is he's not just like very aggressive and insane. He's a complete retard. He did not say fucking off the record once. Yeah. Like, so I'm just thinking to myself, like, this guy's giving me a fucking gold mine right now. I've declined interviews with very big publications who are trying to stay neutral when discussing overt racism. That's not something I'm going to engage with. I'm concerned that you would question how naming a product racist could be racist. I'm like, well, if you name a product racist, literally, that's like a commentary on racism inherently, but I digress. Based on everything that's happening in the world with black people being lynched every day, blah, 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 blah. And then he starts saying that there was a shooting in San Diego where the shooters were fans of Henry's fashion and his work. So I look it up. There was a shooting. I reported on it the day it happened at a mosque. There is zero fucking evidence. All right, first of all, if it's true, that's no different than when people tried to blame like Marilyn Manson and Eminem for Columbine. Second of all, it doesn't seem to be true at all. He's completely making it up. And then when I said, do you have any evidence to corroborate A, that you were a founder of his brand, or B, that any of these other things you said is true, he freaked out. He's dropping 5-minute fucking memos on me, all of which are going to be used for a vintage Adam Lehrer fucking article.
Well, and that's that's another tell, by the way, if you're out there listening and you haven't had this experience of dealing with psycho, when it seems like they're doing something fraudulent or fishy, and you like ask them what happens is this: you ask them, and you're ashamed to ask because that's part of their like black charismatic, not black in the racial sense, dark charismatic effect on people, is that they make them afraid to ask the most basic, to check the most basic boxes of legitimacy. You get kind of you become shy of just the most obvious, basic business practices if you're dealing with them in any sense. This has happened to me, by the way, in the film world, dealing with fake sales agents.
Yeah.
There's so many frauds out there, in this life. And what you do is you ask them the most basic ass question that anyone should ask, and they will flip out. And you can see this writ large in the world of the woke industries Inc., where all across our society, by this version of flipping out and by accusing people beforehand of vast structural oppressive schemes, all of these maniacs have taken control of the levers of culture, power, education, and everything. It's all kind of part of the same thing. If you find somebody flipping out at you for a basic question in a situation like this, you're dealing with a con artist fraud.
100%. Yeah. It was very clear to me. Okay, so I do believe this guy might have been involved with the brand at the beginning, but I think what happened is him and Henry had a falling out over very obvious intellectual disagreements. Henry is a smart, art savvy thinker who likes to do provocation, and this guy is a garden variety libtard. But the fact that he's doing this now, when the brand is blown the fuck up, worn by Kanye, collaborations with Marilyn Manson, big Parisian runways alongside Rick Owens and Balenciaga, is when this guy's coming forward to get his piece of the pie now. What's so fascinating, though, is he clearly didn't fucking Google who I am before he reached out. Yeah. I'm like, dude, I am the last reporter in the goddamn world you should have been giving all this fucking comments to. Like, there's always, like, you can tell these grifters, they try to flood the well, like just try and get as many people to do their bidding as possible, that they lose the sense of who they're actually talking to. Because then he was sending me other outlets that had written about his story uncritically, and it was all, libtard fashion blogs that don't have like a shred of credibility. So it's very easy to, catch this guy in all his lies. But yeah, people with this sort of like histrionic personality disorder, they're not. I would be glad to do I told him, I'm a neutral actor. I'm going to hear your side, and then I want to hear Henry's side, and then I will make my own decision. And he was that he wouldn't accept
they don't that
at all. But he also forgot to say off the record.
And reasonable. Yeah, that's it's always your tell. And the off ramp here, the U-turn back to Jim Goad is this for me. What if, instead of writing about the piece about the 100 greatest suicides of all time, he wrote about the 100 most retarded suicides of all time? What if this was on his mind? What if this had been in his oeuvre, a piece about the obvious maniac retards who killed themselves in disgrace and whose suicide was a kind of piece de whatever the word is, piece de whatever of their completely empty lives? Maybe then he would have felt like this is not the way for him to go. I honestly, so my sympathy, I'm always sympathetic to people who are suffering, especially if it's physical. And they have no, that's just, I fear that all the time. And I worry too about, like, we all face this just with old age. Like, do we want to be vegetables? Do we want to be suffering in pain? Or like, if I unfortunately, these thoughts crack through and I have to lower my IQ a little bit so I don't think about them. You don't want that IQ to be too high. You need to sometimes you need to dial down the IQ a little bit so you can get through the day and with a smile on your face. You don't want to think about all the bleak eventualities that await us. Besides, you never know. You might be plucked in the middle of the night by a blessed heart attack. You don't have to necessarily worry about this stuff. You might be like vanquished by a blessed lung cancer at 73, which seems tragic to all around you, but then is actually just depriving you of later years of torture. So you never know what's going to happen to you. You may be run over by a lady from the Far East who has moved to America.
The thing with Jim and a lot of the artists and writers of the 90s and his generation in general is what made them great. It was also their biggest like liability and pitfall. Like the 90s was a time for whatever reason, but transgression for like the transgressive modes of late 60s conceptual art, 70s punk rock, 80s underground culture. They went mainstream in the 90s, Marilyn Manson, Eminem, Wu-Tang Clan, like Tarantino, all of a sudden these very provocative and offensive artworks were very popular. And that probably did give someone like Jim and Parfrey and all these guys a much bigger platform than they ever would have been afforded in a previous generation. But as times changed in the world, it became increasingly clear that, history and politics had not resolved themselves. And the onslaught of political crises in the 21st century, from 9/11, financial crisis, Obama, Trump, etc., they forced people to take a political side, right? So you have guys like Albini, who became just like a sad shell of a person. Everything influential that he had ever done, he basically apologized for and personally discredited. Adam Parfrey, kind of even more tragic. He passed away in the early 2010s, and his wife, or no, not his wife, sorry, his sister took over his company Feral House and deleted all the most controversial texts like James Mason's Siege and some others. And she has replaced the roster with a fuckload of, troon slop, basically. In his name, which is even more offensive. But the one thing that I do respect about Goad is that when he was, or not the one thing, but one of the things that I respect about him in his later age, when he was forced to take a stance, he really did. He was like, nope, the implications of my writing have always been right wing. He started calling himself the godfather of the new right or whatever, which is, of course, very self-aggrandizing. And then when the alt-right took off, he did become kind of bitter that he wasn't a more central force within it, blah, blah, blah. But he's not like the rest of these guys. They benefited from a world and a culture that could still see ambiguity and gray, and you could flirt with certain themes without ascribing to them. And just because you were writing about a Nazi didn't make you a Nazi. That all changed in the early 2000s. But Goad was like, no, I am a conservative writer. I'm not a Nazi, but I am a right winger, and that's the implications you should take from my work. But you don't have to, too. Like, his writing is just fucking good at the end of the day. Like, he's funny. And what's kind of sad to me, yes, like the suicides thing is a bit dark, and his work was dark and bleak and very nihilistic in a very self-defeating way. But it's also really, really fucking funny.
It is funny. It is 100% extremely funny. It puts so many imitators to shame. Now, I do detect, and you can tell me if I'm wrong, I detect a strong influence of Hunter S. Thompson. Is that? Oh,
100%. Yeah, he would never admit that, but I even wrote about that in the article. It's
obvious. It's really obvious. I mean, especially in the piece that we read for this, where he's very close to home, and a lot of people probably don't know this piece because where you're going to find it except in in the now completely out of print volumes of Answer Me. But he wrote this piece, 24 Hours on Sunset Boulevard, which, I'm balls deep in thoughts and histories and stories and everything for a project I'm doing about Sunset Boulevard. There are, a few iconic things, similar pieces. One, actually, Christopher Hitchens wrote a tour of Sunset Boulevard that was probably influenced by this. And not that I don't recall him mentioning this piece in his piece years later, but this goes in the history books of writings and films about Sunset Boulevard, and it's very interesting what he did, and it's so obviously Hunter S. Thompson. I mean, it is Fear and Loathing on Sunset Boulevard. I mean, that's what it is. So I detected
less
that
drugs,
instant.
but
less drugs, but also nine
he's
cups
just
of
like
coffee
smoking
each.
joints with his wife and plowing coffee. There's not like a 9 trays of blotter acid and 24
Right.
Anvil nitrates.
No, but
I love
the
that first paragraph of Fear and Loathing, though. Hunter S. Thompson he's kind of become like bastardized in the culture, I think, because he's like the first. Everybody gets the Ralph poster and shit, when he's like Salvador Dali of literature, basically, where like people think he's corny because he's so popular and like. But once you get past that, you go back to someone like Dali and Hunter S. Thompson and realize, like, no, they were both fucking geniuses the whole goddamn time.
I still haven't given Hunter S. Thompson a real chance because I was so turned off by his suicide and by his later years of like garbled, nonsense.
He was a wreck, dude. Yeah.
Yeah, he was a massive wreck. I mean, I love his writing schedule, which was to wake up at 3 p.m., instantly do a bunch of drugs, and then finally get to writing at midnight to 6 a.m.
Imagine what shit you would feel like living like that, though.
Well,
It's
yeah,
like filling your days up with Coke and whiskey.
Yeah, I mean, it's basically my days, minus the Coke and whiskey. But it does feel crazy. But there's a techno song where that is set to the lyrics of Joe Rogan rattling off the schedule. I don't remember the song, but I forget the name of it. But if you can find it, there's a song where it's like it's techno set to the schedule exactly. 3 p.m. wake up. Do snort 4 lines. 4 p.m. have a taco salad. 5 p.m. five more 8 balls. 6 p.m. like it's this 6 p.m. and then and it's pretty amazing. But I mean obviously I was very aware of Hunter S. Thompson in high school, and I read he was writing for ESPN.com at the time, if you recall. In his final years he was writing a sports
Fear
column.
and Loathing was a Sports Illustrated article that he fucked up. He was supposed to write
I didn't even know
about,
that. Yeah, I didn't even know that. So
the drag races.
I need to read Fear and Loathing, which I haven't, and I'm sure that's his best work, and I'd like to give it its
that or
due.
Hell's Angels. Hell's Angels is amazing. It's a bit more sober, but here's where the connection to Goat is, right? Hell's Angels was written very, very contemporaneously to the peak of the Hell's Angels notoriety, and at the time, they were being written about in this like vaunted hippie freedom way. These guys, these outlaws living on the edge. But at the same time, the Rolling Stones Altamont concert, of course, they hired Hell's Angels as security, and then they ended up fucking beating a black guy to death, right? So Hunter was already with the Hells Angels when Altamont happened, and he's completely immersed in the subculture. They liked him. He was a very cool and like masculine guy. They accepted him. He got a motorcycle. He's riding across the country with them. But then he instantly sees that these guys are not hippie heroes. They are fucking scumbag, psycho criminals. And he wrote he decontextualized the myth of the Hells Angels and showed that at root they are a criminal or an organized criminal operation that use violence and fear to make money. They're scumbags.
Hell's Angels,
course,
if you will.
They're angels from hell.
Angels from hell, yeah.
And then the book, and this is actually true, they found out about his frame. He became close with the San Francisco chapter president. And he found out about the frame that Hunter was taking
by peeking in his journals, and he got jumped, and they beat the fuck out of him 10-on-1, and that's how the book ends. So yeah, this is like the first piece that really shows the reality of the so-called outlaw life. It's just crime. They're criminals. And he did this very famous talk show appearance where the president of that Hells Angels chapter and Hunter debate before a live audience. And of course, this chud is just completely outmatched as a linguist.
Of course.
But that's what I like about Jim Goat's piece on Sunset Boulevard. It also kind of reminds me of what made the Guns N' Roses great, you know? Anytime that you can peek past the myth of something. He does talk in the article about like how beautiful and manicured some parts of LA are, but you go a couple blocks and you see crackheads and crime and, you know, destitute streetwalkers. And maybe
this is the early 90s, just to be clear to those.
Exactly. This is all history has decontextualized this myth for us anyways.
Right.
But it was the first time that sort of like an outsider of Los Angeles came to the city and wrote about it this way, using Sunset Boulevard and the sort of length of the road itself as an architecture of the whole city to tell about how LA is not just Hollywood. It's not just Beverly Hills. It's many cities. It's many, many, many cities all rolled into one place. I think it's a fantastic piece of writing.
Yeah, it's really good, and it's interesting also how he extends Sunset Boulevard to its actual conclusion, not just where it ceases being Sunset Boulevard, but where the actual road concludes, which is in Monterey Park, which is something that I haven't even considered until reading this article. It's meaningful to me because right now, officially, Sunset Boulevard concludes in Chinatown, but he treated it as a continuous road. It becomes a different street. The same road continues, just becomes a different name, and then becomes a different name after that. The map shows what it is. 1 second. It's called. Let me see what his map shows. And when you combine, Sunset Boulevard is long as fuck as just as Sunset Boulevard, but when you stretch it out all the way to its literal conclusion, it's like, he said, it's like 31 miles. It becomes Macy Street at Chinatown, and then it becomes Brooklyn Avenue for a long stretch, and then it becomes Riggin Street, and then it ends at Monterey Park. And if you go all the way to the Monterey Park, it's 31 miles. It's a 31-mile road, and as he properly says, there is no more diverse a city in the world than Los Angeles, and there's no more diverse a street than Sunset Boulevard. And it, as he properly observes, and as I have, as is the premise of my entire project about Sunset Boulevard, it is the most diverse city in the world. It has all of LA in it. It covers every element of LA, pretty much. And there are a lot of elements of LA. It covers every ethnicity. It covers so many historical, kind of not just landmarks, but like turning points. Like there's so many like intersections with history sprinkled along it. And I love the fact, because it's another thing that I myself have, years before knowing the existence of Jim Goad, have included in the concept. It's that Dodger Stadium is part of it. Dodger Stadium is a couple blocks away from Sunset Boulevard, but it basically ends right at the foot of Dodger Stadium. And so he goes to a Dodger game in the middle of the day. And the premise of this thing is he picks up his rental car at 8 a.m. He's going to drive up and down Sunset and stop wherever he wants to stop with his wife for 24 hours. It's a 24-hour journey. He keeps going. He goes up and down and up and down. And he gets into all kinds of shit. And it's a Saturday. And one of the things he does is go to Dodger Stadium. And his description of being at Dodger Stadium as someone who does not give a rat's ass about baseball or sports entirely is really, really funny. I'm going to find it and read it. And yeah, I mean, this is Hunter S. Thompson-ism at its finest. And the thing is, he likes, in a very Gen X way, he likes the shabbiness and the shittiness more than the manicure.
Which is very Gen
bullshit.
X, but yeah.
Very Gen X, yeah. And I want to read the part where he goes to Dodger Stadium here because
But
it's really a
I
fine.
kind of get that aspect of Gen X, to be honest, because I can imagine living in the Lower East Side when it was a hellhole if you're paying $300 a month to be at the center of cultural history, you know? Like that's fully worth it. I think it's so maybe you get like, oh, whatever, the crime's not so bad. We're living here, we're changing the world. But now when you have to live amongst filth and pay 3K a month, it doesn't feel as good.
Right. No, it's it gets old
Yeah,
real
yeah.
fast when you're living in the thick of it. And he does. And again, a lot has not changed. Like when he describes the various different sightings of barely sentient homeless zombies,
I like how he describes
the
the
only thing that's
graphics on their t-shirt. They're all wearing these like ridiculous graphic t-shirts.
yeah, I mean, there's the only thing he describes seeing male hustlers. God, would I give anything to see male hustlers on the street corners instead of the shit that I see today? There are no male hustlers anymore. There are no streetwalkers, of which Hollywood was drenched in streetwalkers at the time, and in like obvious prostitution that doesn't exist anymore. It's except for like total crack whores, and who are just fentanyl zombies basically. So there's a lot of seediness as you get into Hollywood, and I like the fact that that Hollywood was really peak seedy garbage at the time. Because I remember it very
Yeah.
well because I grew up
I
in
think it's
Hollywood.
because
And I grew up between Hollywood and Sunset. I grew up on both sides. I grew up on my dad's side,
that's
stayed
right.
here. So my original years and Fridays and Saturdays were here in Hollywood in the in its shittiest days until now, and then mixed with Brentwood and Palisades, the pristine part. That's the kind of and every Friday we would drive. My grandmother would pick me up from school and drive all the way down Sunset Boulevard to Hollywood. She would never take the
I
freeway.
think there was like a kind of dark glamour to seediness in that era, because you associate heavy drug use, heroin, things like that with bohemian culture and with artists. I think fentanyl and China produced pharma junk with heavily deadly consequences and like the ability to just completely destroy someone's mind. I think now just like that alluring quality of urban seediness has been completely demythologized.
It's also just so much easier to get drugs
Yeah.
now in a normal way. Because we as we were to connect to Steve Jobs, we have
Yeah, yeah.
iPhones, and the iPhone allows us. Even if we have to drive to a bad neighborhood to make the pickup, the iPhone allows us to organize, arrange, have a decently vetted drug dealer somewhere using Uber. Most of the time they're going to use Uber delivery to get it to you. You're not doing anything. Before, just by virtue of not having an iPhone alone, you either had to know somebody who always had drugs at their house and do it there, or you're driving into these dens of iniquity to get your shit, to score your junk. There are a whole neighbor, and the same with prostitution. You have to go find someone off the street if you want to not have a very
Yeah.
expensive call girl or hustler. And so you have these male hustlers. In fact, one of the projects about Sunset Boulevard, which I actually haven't even watched yet, I have to. It just came to my attention. It's a documentary. It's a fictional documentary. It's like a mix of fiction and documentary called Hustler White. And it's about the hustler. It's like a tour of Sunset Boulevard via its hustlers. I saw just a clip of it. And that all of that now is like you have to be absolutely bottom of the barrel fentanyl's junkie to pick up a hustler of any kind from the streets of anywhere. So the seediness you see now has no allure to it whatsoever.
Yeah, no,
it's
it's
just
gross.
garbage. It's just depressing human bio trash. And therefore it's all gone.
Yeah,
The mystique is all
the
gone.
thing he's writing about that is kind of intriguing to me is, LA is this kind of city of big dreams and big lost illusions, big failures. And it's not like it's a lie. Like it's not like Hollywood glamour is a lie. It's just that it's a fantasy, and then there's like a flip side to that fantasy, and it's actually in that interplay It's kind of like that Balzac novel, Lost Illusions. I know it's a highbrow reference, but for real heads that read it, they know what I'm talking about. But
Right.
it's like
I,
that
I'll so
interplay
in
in those two qualities between the big myth and the big reality that the city actually takes on this very interesting character. And he's just like documenting that
and
thing as he drives down Sunset Boulevard.
yeah, drives down and up and back down and up
Yeah.
and in Dodger Stadium, his description is novelistic. The crowd is the usual mix of fans, professionals, and unemployed alcoholics. It's a 1 p.m. game, or it's a noon game, actually, on a Saturday. They don't do that anymore on Saturdays. And by the way, back then you can go to a Dodger game for like 50 cents, literally, and especially up in the T deck where he's sitting. The crowd is the usual mix of fans, professionals, and unemployed alcoholics. Many men are wearing shorts, which should be illegal. There's a boomer take. Some drunk guy who looks like David Letterman takes off his purple t-shirt and starts spinning it over his head. This goes on for, say, 5 minutes. He's happy in his dumb little world. We hope he falls over the guardrail and splatters into the decks below. Someone sits in the row in front of us and takes off his shirt, revealing ape-like mounts of body hair. He swabs it all down with amber globs of bain de soleil. More men remove their shirts, revealing more hairy asses. Why are sports fans always so fucking fat? One dude has a snarling rash all the way down to his anal crack. Livid boils are visible from 40 feet away. Play ball! Baseball means patriotism, corporate sponsorship, family values, babies. Everything Answer Me is against, right? People dot the seats like jimmies on the ice cream cone of the collective unconscious. They become one mind. Baseball brings them together, giving them common cultural meaning. They identify with the home team, though most of its members aren't natives of the area. Fans yell at the players, using first names as if they know them personally. Everything the crowd believes in is affirmed when the Dodgers get a hit. Claps start from nowhere and build into a rhythmic thunder that would make Mussolini proud. People applaud in blind insect reflex. The pipe organ gooses the mob onward toward mass hysteria. Doodle-a-doo-doo-doo! Charge! That terrifying tribal ritual known as the wave begins. I hate the wave. Following some unspoken cue from back in their brainstems, one section of sun-baked fools all raise their hands heavenward, followed by the next section, then the next, around the stadium, transforming the crowd into a giant rippling reptile. Testosterone casualties trample over each other in their quest for a foul ball, acting like the swine they are. The person who retrieves the ball hoists it high as if it were the head of a slain rival. More people begin spinning t-shirts over their heads. They scream with such joy, such throat-curdling gusto. Is this entertainment or a fascist rally? You decide. This is also very Gen X.
Yeah.
It's the first baseball game I've been to in 20 years and nothing's different. Players are changed, hand signals are given, and men scratch their genitalia, all at the pace of figs crawling through a colon. It must soothe old men's bowel problems or something, because I don't understand the appeal. The game's so slow, it's hard at times to tell whether play is in progress or has been halted. Even the crowd looks stone bored. Many aren't even watching the game. I'm tempted to run naked onto the field and disrupt the flow of play. So, it continues, but you get the idea of how of where his observational viewpoint is set.
And that's actually something I took from him.
And it's true. It's like
Sorry, go ahead. Yeah.
Yeah, no, you were saying like it's set. You can see that this is the awareness. This is the high IQ awareness of bleak reality. When you're at the game and you're a kid, or you're in a childlike frame of mind, all of the things he just described are wonderful forms of pageantry. Like they're what we talk about in our, nostalgic pining. It's like for these things, like the fact that these losers could be at this game is in itself a figment of the past because it's too expensive for unemployed alcoholics, by the way, to go to anymore. There's no such thing. Tickets are way too expensive for the unemployed alcoholic to afford unless they're rich. So already, like the kind of dreggy atmosphere that this describes is this like thing we pine for.
Yeah.
50-cent tickets could.
And even though he's sort of
it.
critical of it, like he still kind of seems to acknowledge on some level that there is some sort of communal, there's some communal asset to having these kinds of cultural, like these shared cultural experiences. Like even though it might have, been against his own personal sensibilities, and this is something he would write about more as he got older and his conservatism became more, like pronounced. But he does seem to like think that there is, a power to people being able to go to a baseball game together and for like a brief moment, like take pride in their city for whatever that means, But like, what's so interesting too? This is a bit of a side anecdote, but not. But he always wrote about like shitting on family culture, but he did end up having a child much later in life, and his boy is like severely autistic. But he wrote this absolutely beautiful article called 10 Commandments for My Son, which is very simply like him writing to his boy and trying to give him 10 pieces of advice for surviving the world that he just doesn't feel like he has the emotional disposition to convey in person. And he really lets himself get saccharine in a way that he never did previously in his writing. So I kind of like that there's not always this fatalism in his writing. Like he pushes back against cultural normality, but then it still sort of seems to seduce him at various points in his output.
Now explain what. Now he had a bestseller with the Redneck Manifesto, right? Was that a bestseller and he seemed primed for major things.
He did have like, okay, so like he did kind of have like a moment in the mainstream, right? The Redneck Manifesto did really well.
That was what, late 90s or early 2000s? When was that?
97.
When did that come out? 90s.
So even though its arguments seem a little dated now, they were still fairly provocative and interesting at the time. And basically what he argued was that, it's sort of like a dirtbag left argument today, but like how cultural elites use race, like accusations of racism and sexism and cultural politics to control and browbeat poor working class white people, to create this standard that white trash people can never actually live up to, to turn people that are, on the bottom end of the socioeconomic spectrum by all intents and purposes exploited, and how they are treated as they're basically othered by an impossible standard of cultural normality according to this elite bourgeois class that they can't live up to, which to us might sound now like, yeah, no shit. Like, of course, that's how Democratic Party accusations of racism function. But in 97, it was quite a provocative argument. And it did see him have a moment of notoriety. In fact, because Vice magazine in the beginning was totally influenced by Parfrey and Goad. It was like Gavin McInnes was a right-wing hipster. Those were his guys, like that was the aesthetic, like Vice's aesthetic, this like trashy Americana, but vaunted as contemporary art, was what Vice really was before it went through the process of corporatization and pushing Gavin out. But Goad was writing articles for Vice like from like 2000 to 2007, like 7 straight years. Some of them were really funny. He wrote this piece in my favorite issue that Vice ever did, which was the drugs issue in 2005. Had a phenomenal cover of a pusher wearing a ski mask holding a bunch of baggies. Insane, like, so radical as like a mainstream magazine, but the articles were ridiculous. It was like Leslie Arfin's A to Z Guide to Rehab. I remember like Jay was Juicy Couture sweatpants because those were the coziest things to wear while sweating dope out. And then they had like a bunch of shit that I fell in love with, Larry Clark photos and really gross stuff. They found this upper class art professional who got them. They didn't show her face, but she admitted to them that all her veins had collapsed from shooting heroin for so long. So she used a single injection site in her thigh. And then they showed it in a photo. It was like, turn this page if you dare. And then you just see this like fucking massive welt in like right next to her vagina where she would shoot over and over and over. And yeah, Goad in there had a really funny piece about his dalliances with methamphetamine, which was his favorite drug because it gave him, the kicks to write. It's kind of a masculine drug. It's not very sentimental. So yeah, like he was before, 2010's wokeness came to dominate all of culture, including Vice. Goad had his moment. And I think that moment, like tasting it, would be the thing that embittered him for the rest of his life.
It's a very dangerous thing when you taste that possibility of mainstream success and then it's taken away from you for off-screen reasons.
I think about it with like
not for real reasons. It's not even just like, oh, I was briefly famous and then my moment passed, which has its own tragic nature to it. But when it's taken away from you, as it was from him, it wasn't organically fumbled. It was really taken away from him.
Yeah,
right?
I mean, he was still writing books. It's just like all these, he ended up, him and Gavin, like, right? Like they ended up, instead of being able to write in like politically neutral media, which is really what defines success as a writer, is that you can express your viewpoint regardless of the politics of the publisher. He got, very bastardized into like, he had a column with Tacky Magazine. Tacky Magazine was fucking phenomenal, by the way. Like people really forget how good the writing was on that website. Did you ever read Tacky Magazine?
Well, I probably by accident, but at the time I had already kind of stopped reading political writing. My interest in politics basically dissipated around 2005 when I was 20, because I gorged on it so much and I came up on it that I was like, I was looking toward only literary things then. So I didn't even, Vice was kind of out of sight, out of mind even too. Those things were, even though I was running a paper that was similar to it in college, I was already kind of not caring as much about that stuff. So I didn't experience that in its heyday. And Tacky's was, if it was 5 years earlier, I would have been all over that site. But, I know Steve Saylor, he still writes for them. He's been writing for them all this time.
Pat Buchanan and Coulter.
I used to email him back in, all these, it was sort of not, for some reason, I was already kind of not looking at politics at the time, and so I missed it.
It was even like, it was kind of interesting because it was like a plethora, it was still sort of post 90s, 2000s, where it wasn't just like one right-wing position. It was kind of like a plethora of conservative viewpoints, which again, would be taken away from us. Yeah,
completely taken away. Completely. I mean, I can attest, because I was literally this entire time I wasn't aware of Tackies because it wasn't mainstream enough, I guess. But like all I was doing and all I wanted to do was get art essays of a cultural nature, of a cultural, like what basically what we're doing now. But well, basically what I do with Filthy Armenian Adventures, but with in essay form and in article form, pitched and accepted and published by the mainstream magazines, cultural magazines like The Atlantic and whatever. And I quickly discovered that the only hope I had were certain conservative journals that, I mean, I got a few things in mainstream places that were very reportorial, but I had like my cover story for the Washington City paper, which at the time was edited by Eric Wemple, if anyone knows who that is. And so I have a soft spot for him ever since, because not only did he publish it, but he defended me when some idiots tried to come after me. But all I had was like, okay, the back of the book section of National Review or Reason or the Weekly Standard. It ended up being the Weekly Standard for me because they had much more flexibility on what they published. The others, it was like everyone had their little narrow, catechism that had to be reflected in all their work, and there was just so little. And of course, all the mainstream places, they didn't even necessarily go libtard yet, but they're just not interested in anything that wasn't like a easily quantifiable kind of clickbaity thing at that point. The journalism industry was just dying in the late 2000s. And I think this and you couldn't find any experimentation.
And this was like, because Goad was not a bog standard conservative, right? Like to most conservative, let's use like Bowtie Tucker Carlson at the time as like the bog standard institutional conservative, even though he's become more of the garden variety crank and retard. But Goad is like a hippie to these people, right? Like he knows about culture and things that are completely out of their purview. So there was a time, also Chronicles was a great example. Like they published like really dense intellectual material by writers like Samuel Francis. Like Samuel Francis's essay on The Godfather is one of the greatest works of film criticism of all time, in my opinion. That's just all gone in the 2010s because of wokeness and because of conservatism's inability to deal with and reconcile with what was happening on an industrial level in the media. Interesting perspectives were denigrated and eventually just completely lost from all these publications, and the whole world was reduced to monotonous talking points. And true renegades and idiosyncratic minds like Goad, like even Gavin to a lesser extent, Samuel Francis, these guys would no longer have a place. Who was publishing Goad at the end? It was the what's that publication that's like straight up like a neo-Nazi publication?
Oh, Jim? God, I don't even know. It gets worse than Taki's.
Well, Taki's most controversial thing is he was supportive of the Golden Dawn party in Greece. And Golden Dawn...
Right, because he's a...
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, he's a Greek. What's his full name?
Yeah,
Taki or whatever.
Theocropolis.
Taki Theocropolis. There should be more Takis out there.
Countercurrents.
Why is there only one?
What's up?
Countercurrents. Yeah. Okay, yeah, I've heard of them.
They got some good stuff on their website, but yeah, like a lot of it is just straight up like anti-Semitic nonsense, which is not Goad at all. Goad is on the record saying he believed the right's insistence on anti-Semitism was stupid and quote unquote low IQ, but that's the only place that would happen. So like to find alternative viewpoints, you have to go all the way to Nazism. Do you know what I mean? Like that's a huge cultural crisis.
Yeah. Of course, it's been the case and that was the case even before it fell upon Goad. I mean, I'm saying like my point is too that historically that became the case even before the awakening made anything, because like when the journalism industry crashed in 2007-ish, that became the case. There was no room for any interesting writing anywhere anymore, just beyond even the political aspect of it. Like there was just none. And there was nobody who had any idea how there would ever be again, how there would it would ever make, ever be profitable enough for anyone to publish interesting shit again that wasn't basically clickbait. One version of clickbait or another, whether it was literally clickbait or not. Like everything became extremely bean counting, and that's exactly when I graduated college in the hopes of fashioning some sort of career as a writer. So it immediately instructed me that I had to turn my car back around, as he does every time he gets to the ocean in this Sunset piece. Turn my car back around and drive back to Hollywood from Washington, D.C. and New York, because the only, as incredible as it sounds, the only hope seemed to be in film and television for creative expression whatsoever in the year 2007, 2008 and beyond. And it turned out to be more or less, that turned out to be the case until kind of these alternative, that is the case. That turned out to be the case until podcasting. I know it's easy to
write off Substack, but I do think Substack was very important to the extent that it did allow people to do this shit again.
Oh yeah. For sure. So I put Substack podcast. Until that was way later though. Substack didn't come along until 2020.
But for me, that was so huge. I didn't get a job through the normal application channels. I got it through creating a Substack that became popular. But what we said before, the pain of losing any kind of institutional backing once you have it, dude, of course I'm terrified that if it ever happened that Tablet, this very prestigious publication that gave me a home and accepted my viewpoint and is happy to promote me and give me a fucking paycheck that allows me to pay my bills and feed my son and everything. If that was taken away from me, it would be devastating because it's never going to happen again.
And it's not, and even that, if that happened, it wouldn't be as devastating as what it seemed like happened to Jim Goad, because we're not just talking about a paycheck. We're talking about status as a nationally and internationally, because it's America, recognized force, like a best-selling author who can get book contracts potentially for 7 figures. If that, we all know where that can go in a culture that's open to experiment, to interesting ideas and voices. And we all know how impossible that is for a whole range of people now, especially including someone who was as extreme in his humor and in his darkness as Goad. And it's a totally different world. You're to be confined to the digital ghettos of versus having a best-selling book and having potential movie deals and this and that. I mean, Gavin McInnes went through the same process, but he succeeded for a longer time. And he was able to make a bunch of money. And so he was able to more successfully pivot to being a pirate, maverick in the wild. But even still,
he got pennies compared to what the other guys
to
got,
Vice.
Though.
Of course. Well, he's got a podcast that who even knows about except for his most ardent fans. I mean, he's in that same sphere as
they gave him 20
peace
million,
and stuff.
Which is pales in comparison to Shane and Sarouche walking away with hundreds of millions.
Yeah, all these fucking faggots. I mean, look at Ezra Klein's a billionaire. I don't know, his companies have gone his bullshit has gone for billions. Ezra Klein, the most banal nothing burger of a mind in existence. I mean, it's just not. We're talking about a complete. The fact is that, and again, even in America and in the greatest times, there will always being a mediocrity has a certain kind of competent, productive mediocrity who serves the kind of middle monster is always going to be more lucrative than being a genius. That's never been. That's always the. I mean, that's why we talk about art. That's how the myth of the artistic. Impoverished artistic genius was born. It's a false myth, but it comes from the fact that compared to the grand poobahs of the time, I mean, very few artists came close to. I mean, compare David Lynch, however wealthy he ended up being, or however much money he made. Compare him to any number, Guillermo del Toro. You know what I mean? Michael Bay, exactly. That's what in that sense, it's always been more lucrative to be like Michael Bay and these bastards. But but then it became to where you basically couldn't even. There's actually nothing available for the David Lynch of this genre. You know, David Lynch is apolitical enough that he was able to ride the wave and make it back, and Hollywood was open enough to his kind of genius that it allowed for it, much to the credit of Hollywood, by the way, and much to the credit of the kind of Hollywood we all love, which was viable, you know, as recently as whatever the 2000s, maybe when Mulholland Drive came out, but and maybe we can get back to that because there have been pockets of hope here and there since then. But, you know, it's like, he's Jim Goad. The fact that I didn't know about him until 2023 or whatever, since I saw his book at Jocko Homo's house, the fact that I had to see his book for the first time at Jocko Homo's house in 2023 is absurd. I should have, you know, had I known about Answer Me in the 2000s, it would have inspired the kind of ideas that it's coming up with for the Bruin Standard at UCLA. It has that energy of a truly independent, outrageous journal that's thinking, you know, this the very idea of spending 24 hours driving up and down Sunset Boulevard is very like college campus, like, you know, edgelord supreme, you know.
One thing,
it's great, and it's tragic how it had to end, and I'd like to get back to that at the end of our conversation. It's the sunset did not have to be
just because I got to wrap up in like 10-15. I just want to say,
me too.
Two things that I think were formerly influential to me about Jim Goad. First is that, and this is beyond like politics or anything, but he had this, there's the great critics, Pauline Kael, Clement Greenberg, I could go on and on, but the great critics,
Thomas Chatterton Williams, Jason Arday,
but they're
Ta-Nehisi
able
Coates.
to do something where they can find avant-garde value in things previously regarded as trash, and they can write off things that are vaunted as, you know, titanic symbols of modernity to trash. And this is something I always loved about Answer Me is like the first time, did you ever read Iceberg Slim's book, Pimp? Okay, so
No.
I consider it one of the greatest Black novels ever written. But the reason anyone like me knows about this book is because of Jim Goad's interview with Iceberg. He interviewed him in prison. And what's insane about it's Iceberg Slim's story. It's a memoir. It's a story of his life as a pimp. It is unparalleled in its misogyny and in its depiction of human ugliness. But what Jim is attracted to it is it's a much more authentic exploration of Black urban life, but still written by a guy who's every bit as gifted with the pen as Baldwin or Ishmael Reed or whoever. I love Ishmael Reed, but you know, there's a real literary quality to this novel, right? And Jim's not writing you know, of course it's like, yes, it's a pimp, it's funny, blah, 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 but he's really giving this guy in this interview the treatment befitting of someone who he considers a great at his craft. I love that kind of thing where you can like retcon a forgotten text or a forgotten artwork into the lexicon and have people think about it in an entirely different way. And to this day, if you meet any fellow edgelords and ask them, you ever read Iceberg Slim? Everyone has the same reaction. Oh my God, I fucking love that book, dude. You know, like it's become a classic all because of Goad. And the other thing that is really important about Jim Goad is he is ostensibly like a journalist. He didn't really write fiction that much. It's always about subjects that are real and happening in real life, but he writes them as literature, right? So there's like Nick Land's theory of theory fiction or whatever. The best readers can read history as fiction and fiction as history, and just and it all becomes like text and form and ideas. And I think Jim had this like unbelievable ability to take a funny slice of life subculture story, like the Vietnamese Los Angeles gangs, for instance, is another great one. And this is also very Hunter S. Thompson, but write about them almost as like mythical heroes or mythical anti-heroes. Like the Vietnamese street gangs are like Odysseus and Achilles or whatever, you know? And it's funny, it's subversive, it can be cruel, but also at the same time, it's just it's very open-minded in a way, and it makes you think about the world differently, which is ultimately what my favorite writers do. You read their work and it changes how you think. That's why he was so good.
And why did it have to end this way? I was reading Matt Forney's reminiscences about these feuds that Goad had with, I guess, kind of his own offspring in the edgelord sphere. You know, like I was reading about these stupid fights, and I'm like trying to make, you know, it all sounds crazy.
Well, the really bad one
so
was
crazy.
the Owen Benjamin debate. I'm not a fan of Owen Benjamin, but he destroyed Jim in this debate that wasn't even a debate. Like this, Jim was basically attacking this guy about being a fake Hollywood conservative, right? Because you could arguably say that's who Owen Benjamin is. He got canceled and then became a right winger as a comedian in Hollywood. But then all Owen Benjamin had to do was point out the fact that he's happily married and has 3 kids who love him, and then brought up the ultimate taboo to bring up with Goad, which is that he was kind of an absent father to a son who was very needy of, you know, special attention. This kid was really autistic, and Jim did not know what to say. It's one of the most uncomfortable 9-minute videos you'll ever watch.
Right.
So his moral failings as a person, which were very real, I think did end up haunting him in a really severe way.
It must have, and that catches up with people. It just does, because you reach a point where the energy and stimulation of having an active career fades, however much, and the remorse over the mistakes you made takes its place, and you have more time to think about these things and be haunted by them, especially if you have a conscience. I mean, if you're not a sociopath, you have these, it can crawl in and it can
guilt is
torture you.
And most painful emotion in the entire world, because it's on one level, it's a mark of your decency as a human being, but it's also so real. You did something that you regret and you cannot take it back.
And he did he flirt with Christianity, or did he never flirt with? I was vaguely reading some.
Yeah.
He never gave it a chance.
Or I guess he changed his position to agnosticism more recently, which is typically the less arrogant way to say you're an atheist.
Yeah, but it's also too little, too late, and it's definitely too little, and it was unfortunately too late. But you know, that's the unfortunate. That's not unfortunately, but most people with a Gen X, you know, spine and backbone and an anatomical mental structure are so just so opposed to really taking the possibility seriously, that, you know, accepting God is the one way out of this eternal torture that awaits the highly cerebral mind. And even that's not going to necessarily absolve you from being tortured. I mean, it might just substitute a different kind of torture, but it is a much more bearable
Brings
kind
things
of
into
torture
context.
if you find a way. Yeah, it's just, I mean, it's just the way it is. And if you kind of stick to your pride instead, or you're just simply incapable. I don't like to be arrogant about people who fail to believe, because it's not easy, and it's not like you can just, it's not only a choice,
Especially
although it can
with
be a
someone
choice.
with
just
like Goad,
suicide is a choice.
like Sean Strickland. He's a retard or whatever, but great fighter. But he talked in an interview once. I found it to be the most moving thing he ever said. He talked about being 9 years old and hiding under his parents' bed with a knife. So when his dad came home drunk and started beating on his mom, he could prevent his dad from killing his mom. And he said he was sitting there under that bed holding that knife. And it was the first time he thought maybe God doesn't exist, because if God was real, why would he put a little boy in this situation? Goad had an extremely, extremely traumatic upbringing. A brutish alcohol, so cliche, a brutish alcoholic father and a completely
Yeah.
emotionally distant and absent mother. And that is the kind of person that has the most time finding solace in religion, because they feel like they've been, I think he felt like he had been forsaken, you know?
Right. And I don't blame him for anyone for feeling that way. And it's also just, it's a tale as old as time. And ultimately, what's required, it's also a matter of pride, in the sense that you think you're being a coward if, for the sake of your own conscience, you strike up a bargain with Jesus at the end to kind of comfort you, and it feels all very gay and fake to a lot of people, and it, understandably so, when you see certain versions of that. It seems just like this. It just seems fake to a lot of people, and in order for it not to seem fake, for you, the Jim Goad of the world, you have to devote some of your creative energy to taking the possibility seriously, and examining it, and the people who have come before you with an equally high IQ, if not higher, who've gone down that path. Like you have to give it a little bit of a chance, at least intellectually, so that you just have to, and that comes from making the sober assessment that it would be the only way out of the dark corner you're in, because we all know intellectually that life is full of evil. I mean, that's even however nice our upbringing and however lucky we've been, such as myself. The evil is all around us. It doesn't take much to see it. All it takes is just being slightly educated and slightly aware of your surroundings to see how much evil there is. And you have to. What you do have to choose is if you want to triumph or over it. That's the choice that has to be made. And then where that choice leads is up to mysteries that are above my pay grade. But it sucks. It seems like he didn't, because of these online little pissing contests that he involved himself with at the end of his life, and because of how cruel everything is in this kind of milieu and the tone of it all, it seems like he wasn't aware. He should have been more aware, in my opinion, reading all of this, of how much influence he should have been. He should have been a grandfatherly figure, and ultimately, at least up until 2024, 2025, when Trump got back into office, that was ultimately a crown, kind of a, I don't know if he saw it that way, because he probably doesn't give a shit, but that was a crowning moment for someone like him. That was the moment when the sphere that he godfathered triumphed over, the censored, completely marginalized, and the abandoned, dismissed sphere of edgy souls, actually triumphed against all odds and got and restored some of their self-respect and dignity, which many of them would piss away due to their own idiocies. But as like there was no, he should have felt like as he should have felt like an elder, like a artistically accepted and revered elder that he was. I mean, he's like the
he called himself the godfather of the
that
new right, and I think he did the light in Trump 2016, and felt he was a part of it. But by 2024, I think he just felt embittered and forgotten, and he was really just becoming like an old crank in a manner that was unbecoming of him.
Yeah, it's too bad. It's too bad. The Hunter S. Thompson influence is very dangerous. We saw what he did. I feel like I blame a lot of what happened to Johnny Depp on his reverence of Hunter S. Thompson. I know I met a very bright 13-year-old in the family friend, the son of a family friend. He was very bright. He was telling me about how much he's into Hunter S. Thompson and all these other writers.
Oh, wow,
at
cool.
13, one of these bright kids. Armenian kid. At 15, he blew his brains out with his uncle's rifle. And it was just the tragedy of the community. And it was just like, and I was just like, what? And then it hit me. Hunter S. Thompson strikes again. So be careful. Do not give your children, do not give your teenage boys Hunter S. Thompson. It is something for a later date.
Because it is such a, his view is kind of a bummer. It's like everything is corrupt. The American dream has been stolen from you.
And you don't need to be bummed out.
I mean, there's things I like about Hunter. Like, he's definitely not like a down the line leftist by any means. Like, he really did love America, or at least the idea of America. And he had this kind of patriotism that you don't usually get from new leftian, hippie aligned scribes. But his conclusions were always like, America has been stolen, the American dream has been stolen from you, and it's never coming back,
I mean, beyond that, it's, I think what would infect someone like a bookish 15-year-old is the romance of the darkness and the bleakness of the vision.
Oh yeah.
The fact that, of course, Thompson himself blew his brains out, like the false dignity and honor and gallantry of these bleak conclusions is what I think really infects. I mean, because when you're a teenager, you're prone to melancholy, a teenage boy especially, but I think girls too. You're prone to these morbid, melancholic fits, and yeah, we all were. I mean, it's so easy to see you getting swept up.
Did you have any writers who set you down a dark path? I have a couple.
Good question. Well, I've documented my struggles with Ayn Rand, but that was not a dark path. That was just that was a good path. That was a bright path, and then a complicated path. But have I? No, I don't think I've been truly, because I was always more, that's the thing, because I was always conservative from the beginning. So I was always examining writers from that kind of, I was always like putting the moralistic lens on their energy. So no, I don't think so. I could be forgetting about something, but I don't think so.
For me, it was Burroughs and Irvine Welsh, for sure.
Burroughs, I can see. Yeah, Burroughs is exactly, and I'm sure the kid also read Burroughs. I have no doubt in my mind the kid also, the who blew his brains out, also read Burroughs. I don't know about Irvine Welsh. I haven't read him, but
does tell you the dark side of all his, like, he does his best to illustrate the horror of being an addict, but it's still kind of written in this like jazzy bebop way that does romanticize the outlaw life to a large extent, and you can't help but become like,
exactly,
and similarly with Trainspotting, like it just seems kind of cool and fashionable.
It's all very hypnotic when you're young, because not only because you don't know how shitty it is in practice and how disgusting and how morbid, but because for you, when you're young, you don't understand what mortality is. You don't understand what death is. You think you get it. You think, and it seems kind of cool, but you don't understand what it really is and how inevitable it is regardless, and how stupid it is to throw away your few decades on Earth on kind of advancing death forward and in glamorizing death. I mean, you can do it, but you have to do it in a way that, like, you don't know what the real challenge is of being alive yet. So you're kind of putting the cart before the horse, and you're like, well, since we're all going to die anyway, might as well be cool and smoke cigarettes and ride on the road and fuck. And you're like, you think you're choosing this like eternal style, chic style of existing, but you're not. I mean, it's not. It's a very temporary. It's a very, very temporary distraction from what's really happening. And so you might, you kill yourself not realizing you're not killing yourself for the right reasons. You're killing yourself as part of this romance that you've been seduced into. I'm very lucky, I guess, that I wasn't attracted to dark writing. The darkness I was attracted to was the Edgar Allan Poe, Agatha Christie mystery darkness, which is actually not dark at all. It's actually very, it's a very safe place because it's a world in which justice prevails. It's a world in which the things that happen are, the mysteries that are caused are ultimately solved in a way that is morally appropriate. Yeah. And they're solved by brilliant men figuring out problems and seeing through bad men. So it was a very kind of fairy tale atmosphere of my literary tastes at the time in fiction that I began with. And I think that was ultimately, it wasn't cool. It didn't prepare me to write Less Than Zero at 15, the way Brett's influences prepared him to be such a famous and great author. It had its limitations very severely, but it did put my secure my spirit.
Well, that's interesting. You bring up
better,
Brett though. It's like he was one of the first writers I've ever loved, and like for sure one of my biggest influences to these days. But I never felt that his work was a dark influence on my life ever. Which is interesting because obviously, like, American Psycho is a violent and ugly book to a large extent, but there's this, like, he has this sort of joyousness in, like, the act of writing itself that always, like, his work is very fun to read, and, like, when you find other fans of it, it has this communal aspect. Like, you meet other guys that have been influenced by him, but Burroughs, I think he honestly, I think someone like Burroughs might have even liked that he had this corrupting influence in his work. I think that was part of how he saw himself as an artist.
He seems like a real piece of shit.
Like, I'm here to corrupt America's youth.
Brett, to be honest, the only Brett novels I've read are Less Than Zero and Shards. And then I've also read White, but I haven't read anything in between. And of course, Less Than Zero and Shards are like both written from the same world with the same similar characters, I think, right? I don't know. Well, either way, they're very similar, even though they're
Shards
from bookends of it.
Yeah, I mean, the Shards is like when he's still in high school, and then Less Than Zero is like he's back from summer break in LA again.
Right. So it's like the same, and the Shards is a much more like salacious novel because he's leaning into the genre of it being a thriller a little more. He's having so much fun with it, and it's much longer. And Less Than Zero is a much more like deadpan.
Well, I think the Shards too. It's also like Balzac's Lost Illusions, because a lot of it is about like the fear of losing that childhood dream. It's slipping from your grasp as it happens because you have this detachment as an observational writer. That this thing that gave you meaning and happiness and joy in your life, this small circle of friends and this belonging, it's fading away as you become an adult, which is a much more solitary existence.
Yeah, and you see in its kind of tone, and in Brett's tone generally, and in Brett's point of view, you see how he has achieved at a very young age that ability to deal with the ugliness surrounding him, specifically his own father and whatever the shit that's going down in his home. You see that he has developed this detached writerly persona from a very early age, and that it has it
Yeah,
has
yeah,
it
totally.
strengthened him. It has emboldened him considerably to be who he is, to become who he is, Bret Easton Ellis. And so you see him playing with that in the works, and it permits him to. I mean, he's personally. It's funny to see what his character in his books is personally crushed by and not crushed by. When the producer sucks his, like the 40-year-old producer dad of his friend sucks his dick, he doesn't give a flying fuck. Like, he doesn't care at all. And but when one of the girls is disloyal to her boyfriend, who's his friend, that to him, when he confirms her disloyalty because she doesn't acknowledge Robert Mallory one morning at school in a way that only someone who has something to hide would. That's a funny, a great moment in the shards in the book when he does that. That's crushing to him, because that is breaking, because the producer dad fondling his cock in exchange for screenplay favors, that doesn't do anything to the illusion. That doesn't do anything to his world. That to him is just a fun, crazy thing that happens in Hollywood, at the Polo. A taste of adulthood and how things really are in show business. That's fun. That's exciting. But when there's an act of disloyalty within that's going to break up this beautiful little nucleus of youthful friendship, that's what is crushing. And it's interesting to see him play with it. And it's why he's able to deal with all this shit that happens to him and that happens in relation to him without ever seeming bitter. Like, he talks about people who have like written the worst things about him, and it sounds like he's completely bitter. Speaking of made up psychotic bullshit, I'm not going to mention his name so as that I don't like summon him like a spell, but someone who forced himself onto Brett's show once and wrote a novel that so we just found out that he literally made up a Brett blurb.
That's what you guys are talking about?
For his novel. Yeah. So there's a blurb, and Brett does not give blurbs, but the guy just made up a Brett blurb, put it on his book, and Brett didn't feel like, Brett was pissed, but didn't feel like doing anything about it, apparently, right? So there's another example of some psychotic bullshit. He just can't be bothered.
It's like a low-level Jonah Lehrer,
It's just like, and it's because also because good people usually just don't have the time to deal with shit.
And that's how those people thrive, by the way.
Yeah, that's how
they thrive on your goodwill and like
disconnect
disconnect and dispassion about their acts of abominable evil.
Yeah. That's why you need just one good-hearted but litigious Jew on your side to unleash upon these fucking assholes anytime they come around. You need a Ted on your side.
Anything you wanted to say about Goad before signing off?
No, I wanted to pay respects to him. That was my, I know all of you have been heavily influenced by him, and I was too lazy to buy the book when it was available. Now I can't find it anywhere. Like, it was only $40 for years, and I was just too lazy to order it. And so now I don't know where I'm going to get it. It's like I've seen absurd prices for like
I have the
PDF
rape issue too.
I'm going to go
through like impossible to find anywhere.
Oh, that's awesome. Yeah. So I'm going to read it. He deserves his reputation. It is sad it had to end that way. And I'm especially impressed by this Sunset Boulevard piece, which I heard Jack talk about when he had somebody.
Yeah, that was a good episode.
Answer Me, and I was like, oh, there's a Sunset Boulevard thing that I don't know about. I must get my hands on this. And it's obviously very relevant to this world, to my world.
He was paying attention to what we were doing, and I it seems like there were times when he wanted to embrace us, like when he reached out to me, or I think he reached out to Jack even at certain points, and there's always this aspect of like, oh my God, Jim Goad is interested, like Sotos too, like. Sotos and I know each other really well now. He's actually, it's weird because Sotos you'd think is like a way bigger freak, but he's actually like way easier to get along with and like way less hateful about everything than Goad is. But like, I don't think Goad knew where he fit anymore. And I'm not saying this is why he killed himself. His physical pain was real, but I think his emotional pain was just as real. And I think they were both sort of interacting with each each other in a way that just made life seem unbearable. I wrote about this in the article, but one of my sources, who is a longtime friend of his, had tried to end her own life in the early 2010s. And this kind of speaks to what he was going through. But Goad had denigrated her, calling her a weak and coward for attempting to, which is, sort of a human response when you're upset that someone you care about would do such a thing, but is not the thing you should say to someone going through something so real that they would make such a terrible decision. And she told me that 3 weeks before he ended up taking his own life, she knew something was wrong because he had reached out to her and said, "I'm so sorry about how I treated you after you tried to kill yourself. It just didn't make sense to me. It makes sense to me now. And I know that how real those thoughts can be." So like, he was absolutely in a really horrible place. And personally, I don't think that makes him a coward or anything. I think a lot of people can lose their grip for a lot of reasons. But what I want everybody to take from this is that as complicated as the legacy of Jim Goad is, there's so much you can take from his work. You can take humor, you can take truth, you can take idiosyncratic viewpoint, a guy who was willing to say things that no one else would say in print. All these things like are important in these renegade personas, and I hope his work takes on more historical importance in the coming future.
Amen, and rest in peace, Mr. Goad.
R.I.P. Jim.
This episode of Filthy Armenian Adventures was recorded over the air between LA and New York on August 17, 2026. Guest starring Adam Lehrer of Tablet Magazine, Safety Propaganda, and System of Systems. This show is made possible entirely by the Goad merchants, sunset singers, and oligarchs of the night who subscribe on Patreon to join their elite society and gain access to twice as many adventures plus other perks and the knowledge that you're fueling the light side of the dream. Subscribe to the show at patreon.com/filthyarmenian. Patreon.com/filthyarmenian. We'll catch up at the next red light. Beware of the cameras.